Hello, I'm Sydna Massé. In this video, we're going to talk about grieving your lost child. One of the biggest things after abortion is our inability to grieve. Now, I realize that I'm talking to a lot of you who may have just aborted a few days ago or a few weeks ago. Your experience may be that you're grieving right away. But for the majority of women who walk into an abortion clinic, we believe that this choice, before it's done, is going to be an easy one. There was so many times in my early days that I was terrified of tears. I felt that if I started to cry, I would never stop, and likely it could lead to suicide. So that kept me from crying at all over anything. And really, folks, that is quite unhealthy. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. So, what happened to me in bearing those tears for all those years is that all of a sudden they started to pop out for no real reason. I thought I was going crazy. These would come around times like when I gave birth to my first child. I didn't know that in looking at him, I was missing this child that I'd never hold this side of heaven. So during those first few weeks with my firstborn son, I cried a lot. My hormones were shifting, but the tears were okay. Yet I still was terrified of them. I thought I was going crazy. But once I realized the depth of this pain, I knew that crying was something that needed to happen. Some may never connect their tears to their choice, but they're working to forget it ever happened. Now, what happened to me with my child after my abortion was when I found out I was pregnant, I figured out the due date. I knew it was the third week of March, but once I determined to abort, I tried to forget that due date. In fact, after my abortion, I really didn't work to not think about this child at all. So when March 21st came around, I was betrayed by a friend right around that time. And I was in a college dorm, and I remember crying all night. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, this friend isn't even that close to me. Why am I crying so hard? The next morning, my eyes were sealed shut because I had cried so much. I went to the health center, but I didn't have pink eye. This was just simply grief, but I didn't realize it. And I was afraid of it. I thought, okay, there was just a mental breakdown and it should never happen again. I've got to get a lot harder now so that I don't cry again, because that could mean I kill myself. It was years later when I was reading about the symptoms of abortion PTSD that I saw the point about anniversary syndrome, where the due date of your aborted child or the actual date of the abortion can bring unresolved tears to your heart. And so many women cry and never know why they're doing so. That day when I read about abortion PTSD, I was calmed because my tears did not mean I was going crazy. My tears were normal. And that was a relief. And I hope for those of you watching this video right now that are really afraid of your tears, that you too realize today that tears are something that are natural, and allow yourself permission to cry at last. You know, the Bible talks about how in biblical times people would have tear bottles where they would collect their tears. I find that a little hard to imagine, but this is literally something they did. And the tradition was that when the tears evaporated from that tear bottle, it was an end to mourning. Now, I don't know how that worked, but I can tell you that abortion is an obvious death experience, and few realize that truth when they make this decision. They don't expect to grieve. They don't expect this to cause so much pain, and because nobody's ever talked about it, and society is very quick to tell us that if you chose abortion, grief isn't necessary. And really, we're not even going to give you permission to grieve. For many that were part of our abortion decision, when we become upset, they can get very angry and say, you need to get yourself together, pull yourself together and move on with your life. It was your choice after all. And so we'll attempt to do that. But the heart often has a mind of its own where sorrow is concerned. Psalms 126, 4 through 5 reveals the spiritual benefits of grief. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seeds to sow, will return with songs of joy. That's a beautiful verse. Stifling tears is often the first step on the typical post-abortive journey. A heart that is full of unshed tears can be out of sync with God's comfort because tears draw us close to God. So please, if you've not cried for this child you lost to abortion, give yourself permission today to do so. The lack of sorrowful emotions, particularly after the death of a child, can propel us into many other sinful behaviors that can increase our guilt and grief. Anger and fear are often an ally in keeping sorrow away. If I felt like tears were coming, I could literally get angry and make sure that I didn't cry at all. But that anger would consume me, and it would lead to other decisions that would cause me more problems in the end. Anger pushes away all thoughts of responsibility for taking away a baby's breath, when literally that anger is most often towards ourselves. Blame shifting is a secondary tool in suppressing regret, which, when combined with anger, can result in deeper sin behavior. I remember blaming this boyfriend. All the anger I had was thrown at him. And while I remained with him for a while after my abortion, I can tell you that once I finally left him, I blamed him for everything, in spite of the fact that nobody dragged me into that abortion clinic. If I was angry and if I was upset at him, then I could offset any tears that were piling up in my heart. What I didn't realize was that tears are part of a filtering mechanism in our immune systems. In other words, if we don't cry, then toxins built up in our body. It's long been a scientific fact that shedding emotional tears result in special health benefits. Did not realize that I could actually feel better if I embrace these tears. Now, in the video description, I've included a link to some scientific research on tears that was done by Dr. William Fry. I encourage you to look at that research. I'm not going to take a lot of time going through it, but I think it's good for you to start realizing just how powerful tears can be in a healthy way. Emotional tears literally shed hormones and other toxins which accumulate in our bodies during stress. Now, there's nothing more stressful than making a decision to have an abortion. And that unexpected pregnancy is often involves all our friends and family members telling us their opinions on abortion. So we can get very stressed, especially if we have a individual in our life, perhaps a father of the baby, that's saying our only choice is to abort. And yet we are feeling inside that that could lead to regret. So understand these emotional tears that you may have shed prior to the abortion can be stifled and they need to be released. Crying stimulates the production of endorphins, our body's natural painkillers, and lead to feel-good emotions that literally can bring relief to your heart. In other words, if you begin to cry, it won't lead to suicide. I've yet to talk to a mother who, once they started crying for a child they lost to abortion, has ended up committing suicide. It is in beginning the tears that they find their way to peace. Now, when my father and mother passed away, I cried not only for them, but for every other person or pet missing from my life. Anything I had lost, I began to cry for. But when my father died, I began to realize just the depth of grief that I was going to encounter. I realized in caring for him in the last days of his life that I couldn't cry around him. So when I went home for a shower or something, I had to take time to cry or I would lose my strength. So I would go into the shower and I'd wail. I didn't know where the sound came from, but in wailing, I got all that pain out very quickly. And once the wailing ceased and I took a deep breath, I felt better. I felt stronger. And I was able to go back and support him in a very durable way. And he appreciated that. He asked me not to cry around him. And the only way I could do that was crying when I was apart from him. Each death experience started renewed mourning in my heart for every past loss. So when you begin to cry for this child, realize you may also be grieving everyone else. Human beings don't get over grief. We get through it. I never wanted to get over losing my parents because that would mean I've forgotten them. Now, while my grief is not intense and I no longer cry all the time because I cried in my grieving process after their death, there are days like their birthdays or the dates they passed where I'll take the whole day to think of them. And the tears that I may come then are different from the tears I cried when I lost them. So you will find yourself going through life experiencing different phases of grief. But this grief you have for your lost child or children needs to be begun because it is in that grief where you'll find peace. So today, for birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, when I'm remembering these loved ones, I will allow myself to cry if I need to. But I'm not upset and I don't feel ashamed if I don't cry. And there are times when I actually feel joy when I remember them and some of the cute memories. And I like to think, okay, so what would they say to me today if they were here? And that brings them close, and that's a comfort. Now, while I don't have those memories of the child I lost to abortion, whom I named Jesse, I can remember him in the same peaceful manner because I've grieved his loss. It's a wonderful thing to be able to look at this child and to not cry, but to think about the day that I'll meet him in heaven. Those who encouraged another's abortion decision often work to shut down our tears because our grief makes them uncomfortable. So, for example, I was talking to a dear woman, and her mother took her to the abortion clinic and pretty much insisted that she have this abortion. She was a teenager at the time. And after the abortion was over and she came out of the clinic, the mother was waiting. And the mother was very stern. And she said to her, okay, this is the last time we're ever going to talk about this. And you do not have any ability to cry around me. I want you to just toughen up and get over this. Now, this dear girl, she needed to cry. She had just endured a surgical abortion that was horrifically painful. But when her mother said this to her, everything went flat in her heart, and she just shut up. Her mother took her out to lunch, tried to be joyful around her, and when over the next few days her mother would find her a little bit down, she would get angry at her and say, okay, shape up. Come on, let's get through this. You're not allowed to be depressed about this. It was the best choice you made. And soon, within about 2 or 3 days, the anger that her mother would throw at her just with a look would silence her. And she literally had to go away to cry. The point about people telling us not to cry is that our tears upset them. So in that way, the emotions of abortion bereavement often shoot convictions through these hearts. They feel guilt and shame for our emotions. And so they respond in anger just like we can do when we're upset. Please, if someone is angry around your tears, find a private place to express them. Often the shower is the best place because the sound of the water rushing is a good thing. It can cover up the noise of our grief. But get your tears out one way or another and forgive this dear person who can't endure your crying. They don't know how you feel. And, the hope of comfort is something all of us wish we could have. And sometimes it doesn't come. But in crying and shedding these tears, we can find peace with God. And He can give comfort to our heart. At some point, grief can overcome any individual like a wave on the beach. It rolls in, knocks you off your feet, and rolls out, leaving you breathless. There is rarely a schedule of when the next wave will hit, so you can't prepare yourself. And sometimes you're sitting in an office or a workplace situation and the tears come, and you just need to excuse yourself for a minute. It's sometimes hard to get composure in those moments. And crying can lead your face to become red and splotched, and when you're working, that can be very difficult. But try your best to get the tears out. Dry your face, and then realize that you need to go home and take some time to cry. Those tears are precious to God. And sometimes they come up at the worst times. But if you can focus on them when you have some private personal times and just work to get them out, it can make all the difference. I want to tell you that every tear in grieving a lost child is precious. Jeremiah 13:15 through 16 talks about this mourning and great weeping that we endure. Let me read that verse for you. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. This is what the Lord says. Restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded, declares the Lord. They will return from the land of the enemy. Mourning restores us and gives us hope. Now, I want you to know your children are not in the enemy's hands. Most of the time, when we're not grieving, we are in the enemy's hands. And by grieving, we can escape that. We can come back into God's beautiful presence with our hearts full of mourning and sowed tears that brings us to a point of peace. While our children don't return from heaven, by naming them and grieving them, we can realize them in our heart and they become a piece of us. We will see them again if we know Jesus is our Savior. Psalms 94:12 through 15 says, Blessed is the man whom you instruct, O Lord, and teach us your law, that you may give him rest from the days of adversity. For the Lord will not cast off his people, nor will he forsake his inheritance. But judgment will return to righteousness, and all the upright in heart will follow it. If he simply removes our pain and doesn't bring us to a point where we grieve, we may not learn the intimate details of his love, mercy, and grace. This pain is something we need to understand to avoid sinning in the future. By grieving this child, we learn how precious they were to us, and we learn what sin does and the horror that it can bring to our lives. And in realizing that, we can stop sinning in the future. Jeremiah 9:17 through 21. Thus says the Lord of hosts, consider and call for the mourning women, that they may come, and send for the skillful wailing women, that they may come. Let them make haste, and take up a wailing for us, that our eyes may run with tears, and our eyelids gush with water. For a voice of wailing is heard from Zion. How we were plundered! We are greatly ashamed, because we have forsaken the land, because we have been cast out of our dwellings. Yet hear the word of the Lord, O women, and let your ear receive the word of his mouth. Teach your daughters wailing, and everyone her neighbor a lamentation. For death has come to our windows, has entered our palaces, to kill off the children, no longer to be outside, and the young men no longer to be in the streets. Mourning does not end, it changes. It changes us and it restores us, but there will be more reasons to mourn in the future. Mourning does end, it changes and shifts. Isaiah 60:20 shares this truth. Your sun shall no longer go down, nor shall your moon withdraw itself, for the Lord will be your everlasting light, and the days of your mourning shall be ended. Isaiah 61:3, to console those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. Jeremiah 31:13, then shall the virgin rejoice in the dance, and the young men and the old together. For I will turn their mourning to joy, will comfort them and make them rejoice rather than sorrow. Your mourning, if you lay into it, if you push towards it and allow yourself to grieve, will result in peace. God will honor and heal your heart, and bring you comfort. To begin your grieving process, there is an activity on herchoicetoheal.com. It's in Module 6, Lesson 1. Read the benefits of grief. And once you've read that, I want you to make a grief plan. I want you to work to get your tears moving. And here's some ideas. As I've said before, the first thing to do is find a private place to cry that is quiet and away from others. Here are some ideas to get the tears flowing. You can pull up old photos, things that show you in the days of your abortion. Maybe that's just a week or two ago, but they look like a former version of yourself. That woman that walked into that abortion clinic is no longer you. You've been changed by that abortion, and this grief will change you as well. It will bring the joy back to your heart. If you can't get the tears to flow, then sometimes it's good to just put in a very, very sad movie, a tear-jerking movie that can just give you permission to cry about something else. I watch Les Miserables or Steel Magnolias. The stories can make me cry no matter what I'm feeling, and it might be something that helps you shed those tears as well. You can also begin to write out your feelings and your emotions and read them back to get some clarity into what you're feeling. You can also recall the saddest moment of your life, which might actually be that moment when your child went to heaven. But begin to allow yourself to be sad. And when you grieve, don't be quiet. Allow yourself to express every emotion.